In the freezing fog of the Rocky Mountains, the rescue team thought they were simply racing to help a mountain lion mother struggling through labor. But when the male mountain lion stepped forward, staring at them as if begging for help, they knew something was terribly wrong. And the moment the doctor pulled the obstruction from her body, everyone froze. No one expected something that could change the fate of an entire mountain lion family in just a few seconds. The first sound that broke the quiet of the Rockies that morning was not the wind nor the distant rush of a mountain stream. It was a ragged, trembling cry swallowed by the fog. High on a rugged ridge of Colorado's backcountry, where pine trees bent under the weight of dawn frost, a mountain lioness lay collapsed against the cold stone. Her breaths came in thin, fractured threads, each one weaker than the last. Her flanks shuddered as another contraction seized her body, but she no longer had the strength to rise or even shift her weight. Her paws trembled, claws scraping helplessly against the rock. She was fighting labor and losing. Beside her stood a young male mountain lion, his coat a deep, storm-dark tan that shimmered faintly in the fog. His name, unknown to the humans who would soon race to save them, was Cobalt. He was not roaring, not pacing, not displaying the fierce dominance his species was known for. Instead, he leaned his massive head close to the lioness, nudging her with an almost human tenderness, as if pleading for her to stay awake. He was terrified in a way predators rarely showed. Every few seconds he lifted his head toward the valley below, ears high, muscles rigid, waiting, not for prey, but for help he didn't understand yet was their only chance. The fog thickened until the world seemed carved from pale stone and cold breath. A camera trap set by the wilderness monitoring team weeks ago blinked to life as motion crossed its frame. At first it caught only shadows. Then the shape of the lioness came into focus, her ribs rising shallowly, her eyes fluttering like they were too heavy to open. A deep tremor ran through her abdomen, one violent contraction, then stillness. The camera captured the moment her chest stopped moving entirely. 1 second, 2, 3, and still no breath. Miles away, inside the ranger station, just waking under the glow of early morning lights, Olivia Hart sipped her first coffee of the day, something soothing and familiar, like the insurance commercials that always played on the radio during her shift. She didn't expect anything urgent this early, but when the alert chimed from the monitoring laptop, she glanced over lazily, then froze. The live feed showed the lioness unmoving, a flash of matted fur tangled with frost. Then Cobalt stepped into view, his breath rising in silver clouds. He looked straight into the camera, eyes wide, glowing with something Olivia had never seen in a mountain lion before. Desperation. Her coffee hit the desk as she lunged for the radio. "Noah, Ramos, grab your kits, now! We've got a lioness in active labor, and she's crashing fast." Her voice shook despite years of training. A dying mother in the wild was tragic enough, but a mother in labor meant an entire bloodline hung in the balance. Olivia zoomed the camera again. That's when she noticed the other shape moving behind the fog. A lone wolf, thin, cautious, tracking the scent of blood with chilling patience. It skirted the ridge, watching the vulnerable lioness the way storms watch valleys. Not attacking yet, waiting. Wolves rarely hunted adult mountain lions, but one too weak to stand, bleeding and half-conscious, presented an opportunity the wilderness did not often offer. Olivia's stomach tightened. If the mother faded completely, the wolf would claim the cubs the moment they were born. She radioed again, sharper this time. "We need flares, thermal blankets, and the full emergency kit. Bring everything. This isn't just a rescue. It's a race." Up on the ridge, the lioness tried to lift her head again, but only managed a weak twitch before her body sagged. Frost clung to her whiskers. Her pupils flickered like dying embers. She gave one more strained push, but nothing moved except a cloud of fog drifting past her. Her breathing stuttered, then vanished into silence once more. Cobalt panicked. He pressed his forehead to hers, nudging repeatedly, almost shaking her. He let out a low, cracked sound, nothing like a roar, more like a whimper weighted with grief. He stepped back only to look toward the valley again, as if begging the mountains themselves for someone to appear out of the mist. And then, as if answering a silent prayer, the distant echo of an engine rolled up the canyon. Olivia's truck climbed the winding dirt road below, headlights cutting through the fog in thin, silver beams. Cobalt lifted his head sharply. His ears twitched. His whole body rose, trembling but ready. The Wild did not understand rescue protocols or medical care, but somehow he understood hope. The lioness's chest rose once, then stopped again. Cobalt looked down at her, then toward the approaching humans, then back to her. His breath hitched. His tail lashed once in fear. Yet instead of dragging her away or baring his teeth at the sound of the engine, he did something no ranger in the region had ever seen from a wild mountain lion. He stepped away from her body. Slowly, deliberately. He cleared a narrow path through the fog, as if he knew this was their only chance to save her. As if everything he loved depended on the strangers climbing that ridge. The wind swallowed the scene in a cold hush. The lioness lay still. Cobalt waited. The wolf watched from the shadows, and the rescuers, racing through the fog, had no idea that what awaited them on that freezing ridge would stop their hearts colder than the mountain air itself. The fog grew heavier as Olivia's truck crawled up the narrow mountain road, its tires grinding against patches of frozen gravel. She kept one hand tight on the wheel, the other gripping the radio that crackled with uneven static. Noah followed behind her in a smaller vehicle carrying medical gear, while Dr. Ramos leaned forward from the passenger seat, eyes locked on the faint glow of the ridge high above. Every minute mattered. Every breath the lioness failed to take pushed them deeper into the thin space between life and loss. When the road became too steep for the engine to push through, Olivia braked hard. The truck slid slightly before catching traction. "We walk from here," she said, grabbing her flare pack and emergency blankets. The air up here cut through clothes like broken glass, sharp, cold, fast. She felt it in her bones the way older Americans often described winter storms hitting their homes. Sudden, merciless, impossible to ignore. Noah jumped out of the second vehicle with a pack slung across his back, carrying oxygen, gauze, trauma tools, even a small portable heat pad designed for newborn wildlife. The trail ahead was barely a trail at all, just a winding strip of rock disappearing into thick grayness. Somewhere above, concealed by fog and silence, a mountain lioness clung to the last threads of strength, and the cubs inside her clung to even less. The ridge loomed like a pale giant, both inviting and threatening at once. By the time they reached the midway boulder field, Olivia's breath fogged into the air in quick, anxious bursts. Her boots slipped once on a slick patch of ice. Noah caught her arm. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said, though her lungs burned. "Keep moving. We're close." Then a sound rolled down the mountain, a deep, rumbling growl muffled by fog. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It was a plea. A sound of fear so raw that all three stopped where they stood. Cobalt emerged from the mist like a phantom sculpted from frost and muscle. His size was breathtaking, broad chest rising and falling in sharp bursts, tail flicking low, eyes glowing with worry. He stood directly between the rescuers and the lioness's location, his body stiff with confusion and desperation. His paws dug into the snow-dusted dirt as if he wanted to charge at them and run from them at the same time. Instinct should have pushed him to defend his territory, yet he did none of that. Instead, he took a slow step back. Dr. Ramos froze. "He's yielding," he whispered. "I've never seen a mountain lion do that." Cobalt stepped again, backward, clearing the path with caution and trembling restraint. His breath came in fast clouds, visible even in the dim morning light. Olivia kept her voice low and steady, the way a careful insurance advisor might speak during a stressful claim call. Slow, reassuring, calm under pressure. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "We're here for her. That's all." Cobalt's ears twitched at the tone, and he lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in something eerily close to trust. When they reached the ridge's final incline, the ground angled sharply upward, and a gust of wind nearly knocked Noah sideways. The fog parted just enough to reveal the lioness's body, curled against the stone, her fur stiffened by frost. Her chest rose in the faintest flutter, and her eyes remained half shut, unfocused. Olivia felt her heartbeat lurch painfully. "She's crashing again," Ramos said, already kneeling beside her. "We need to check vitals, temperature, everything." But before they could set their gear down, a haunting cry echoed across the ridge. The lone wolf stepped into view on a higher ledge, its silhouette sharp against the fog, ears forward, breath puffing in hungry anticipation. It paced along the edge like a shadow stitched into the snow, studying the motionless lioness with predatory calculation. Cobalt stiffened instantly. He spun toward the wolf with a strangled growl, the kind that vibrated from deep in his rib cage. His claws scraped the stone as he pushed forward, planting himself firmly between the wolf and the lioness. But even from a distance, Olivia could see the truth in the way his hind legs trembled. He was exhausted, more exhausted than any animal should be while trying to defend his dying mate. The wolf stepped closer, inch by inch, its movements slow and deliberate. It wasn't reckless. It was patient, opportunistic, a predator who knew its moment was coming. "Oh, no, you don't," Olivia whispered. She reached into her bag, fingers closing around a bright red flare. With a sharp twist, the flare hissed to life, spraying sparks and a blinding orange glow into the thick gray fog. She raised it high, her arm steady despite her pounding heart. The wolf stopped. It flicked its ears, squinted at the flare's harsh light, then backed up a few steps. It wasn't gone, but for now it hesitated. Olivia exhaled slowly. "We bought a little time," she said. But the victory lasted only a second before the smoke drifted straight toward the lioness. The thin cloud rolled across her face, and her already shallow breath stuttered again. Ramos reached for her immediately. "Her respiratory rate is dropping. Move the flare downwind." Olivia darted sideways to reposition it, while Noah gently eased the lioness's head to the side, wiping the moisture from her nose. Her body trembled once, weak, faint, then went frighteningly still. Noah cursed under his breath. "Olivia! She's losing consciousness." Cobalt took a step forward, his entire body trembling with terror. He let out a sound that didn't resemble a roar or a growl. It was softer, broken, a sound Olivia would remember for the rest of her life. His golden eyes flicked from the lioness to the humans surrounding her, pleading with them to do what he couldn't. Ramos pressed a gloved hand against her abdomen, feeling the tightening spasms of a labor that had gone completely wrong. "She's obstructed," he said. "Severely. We need to act fast." Olivia knelt beside him, spreading out the thermal blanket, trying to give the lioness a barrier against the freezing ground. Her hands shook, not only from the cold, but from the weight of what was unfolding. Every passing second felt like a countdown, not just for the mother, but for the cubs inside her who had not yet felt the world's cold breath. The wolf paced again above them, its eyes gleaming like small lanterns in the fog. It was waiting, watching. Time was slipping away like melting frost. Olivia lifted her chin toward Ramos. "Tell me what you need." Ramos locked eyes with her, the urgency stark and undeniable. "I need room. I need stability. And I need you to keep anything with teeth away from my back." Cobalt growled at the wolf again. The wind howled through the ridge. The lioness's chest barely moved. And Olivia understood with chilling clarity that the wild had decided to let them in. But whether it was a blessing or a final request remained to be seen. The wind cut across the ridge like a blade, lifting thin sheets of fog that swirled around Olivia's boots as she knelt beside the lioness. The cold ground beneath her palms felt like it was stealing warmth straight from her bones, and the lioness's fur was colder still, too cold for an animal that was supposed to be fighting through labor. Dr. Ramos leaned over the weakened cat with the quiet intensity of someone who had dealt with impossible moments before in medical rooms and in the wild. But even he paused, just for a breath, taking in the severity of what lay before them. "Her contractions are collapsing," he murmured, feeling along the lioness's abdomen with practiced fingers. "Something is blocking the passage. It's not just labor, it's trauma." Olivia felt a sharp pit open in her stomach. Trauma meant blood loss, internal damage, shock. Trauma meant the clock wasn't just ticking, it was sprinting. Noah steadied the lioness's head, keeping her airway clear while checking for the faint rise and fall that indicated she was still alive. "She's freezing, Olivia," he whispered. "Her temperature's tanking fast. If we don't get this obstruction out, she won't last 10 minutes. Cobalt paced a tight circle beside them, muscles taut, tail swishing in a frantic, uneven rhythm. He wasn't threatening them. He was panicking, trying to understand why the lioness wasn't responding to his nudges, why she lay limp against the ridge as though life itself was slipping away. Every few seconds he stopped, staring at Ramos with a fierce pleading in his eyes, like he was begging him to fix what was wrong. The ground vibrated with a faint scrabble of claws from above. Olivia looked up sharply. The wolf had moved closer again, slinking down the slope with slow, predatory confidence. Its breath curled through the cold air in pale ribbons. It didn't need to attack yet. Nature had already done half the work for it. The wolf was just waiting for the moment the lioness stopped breathing. Olivia raised a flare warningly. "Don't try me," she muttered, voice trembling. She knew she couldn't use too many flares. The smoke would poison the thin air around them, and the lioness could barely breathe as it was. But the wolf paused, ears back, weighing its choices. Ramos pulled a small sterilized tool from his kit, his hand steady despite the whipping wind. "I'm going to examine the canal," he said softly, mostly for Olivia's benefit. "Get ready for anything." He pressed gently, carefully, guiding his hand with precision. For a few seconds, nothing happened, just the shallow, uneven breaths of the lioness and the distant growl of the hungry predator circling above. Then his face went still. "Ramos?" Olivia leaned closer. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached deeper, then carefully withdrew something. Something long, something dark, something sharp. It slid out, with a faint scrape against the lioness's tissue, a sound that made Olivia's skin crawl. When she finally saw it clearly in Ramos's gloved hand, her breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God," Noah whispered. It was a piece of wood, not just any wood, a jagged, splintered fragment of a mountain branch at least 7 inches long. The end was stained with a mix of blood and mud, twisted with thin strands of torn tissue. It looked as though nature itself had carved a weapon and driven it into the lioness's body. Ramos stared at it with disbelief. She must have slipped down the ridge. This impaled her internally. It sealed the canal. No cub could pass through this. Olivia felt the cold hit her all over again. Not the weather, fear, deep gut-level fear. She scanned the ground around the lioness and saw faint streaks of disturbed snow leading toward a rocky outcrop above them. The pieces fit together. She must have climbed higher the night before, trying to find a safe berthing spot, only to slide through the underbrush and onto a broken branch. The wolf let out a long, low howl. This time it was closer. Cobalt spun toward it, fur bristling, but the tremor in his legs betrayed his exhaustion. He made a broken, strained sound, half warning, half cry. Olivia's grip tightened on the flare. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a fist demanding to be heard. Ramos set the bloody wood aside, his voice tight. "The obstruction's gone, but the damage? Her uterus is swollen, torn in places. The cubs are in distress. We need to move fast." Noah glanced at the lioness's belly. "She's losing oxygen. She's freezing. She's bleeding. Ramos, she's still fighting," Ramos cut in, his tone sharp with the kind of conviction you only hear in emergency rooms and legal negotiations where life-changing decisions were made in seconds. "We don't give up on her." As though responding to his words, the lioness's flank twitched, barely, but unmistakably. Then another contraction rippled through her, weak, pale, fading, but real. Olivia looked at Ramos with desperate hope. "Does that mean?" "It means we have one chance," he said. "We relieve the blockage. If her body can respond, we're going to see movement soon. Get ready for a delivery." Before Olivia could reply, a sudden shower of loose gravel tumbled down the slope. The wolf sprang forward a few steps, emboldened by the smell of fresh blood. Cobalt lunged toward it with a roar that cracked the air open, even though his body wobbled with the effort. The wolf hesitated again, circling, testing, waiting for weakness. "Keep that thing back," Ramos barked. Olivia moved in front of the lioness, flare held high. She didn't feel brave. Her heart was pounding hard enough to drown out the wind, but the wolf stared at her, then at Cobalt, then slipped back into the fog with a frustrated snarl. Ramos leaned closer, to the lioness. "Here we go," he whispered. "Come on, girl, push." Olivia held her breath. The lioness's abdomen tightened. Then again. Another contraction. Then something slick and pale appeared beneath her tail. Not a limb, not a paw, not the warm shape of a breathing cub. It was still. It was silent. It was small. Olivia's pulse quickened with dread. "What is that?" Noah demanded. "Is it—" Ramos's eyes darkened. "It's a cub," he said. "But it's not moving." Olivia felt the cold close around her heart. The ridge fell silent except for the faint rustle of fog and Cobalt's panicked, quivering breath. The wolf watched from above. The mountain held its breath. And the tiny, lifeless cub lay half-delivered in the snow as the rescuers realized they weren't just fighting the wild. They were fighting time. For a moment, no one on that ridge breathed. The tiny mountain lion cub lay half-delivered in the snow, its pale fur matted with frost and birth fluid, its body limp as a discarded glove. The fog swirled around its still form like the mountain itself was trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth it had. Olivia felt her throat tighten as if the cold had reached straight into her chest. Behind her, Cobalt's breath came in jagged bursts, each one sharper than the last, each one sounding more like a plea than a warning. Dr. Ramos was the first to move. With a steady, practiced motion, he eased the cub free and lowered it gently into Olivia's waiting hands. It was small, far too small, light as a handful of snow, and absolutely silent. No cry, no twitch, no movement. Olivia felt that awful stillness travel straight up her arm, like an electric shock. She had seen animals come into the world week before, but this felt like a life barely hanging by a thread so thin the slightest wind could snap it. Noah hovered at her shoulder. "Do you feel anything? Breath? Pulse?" Olivia shook her head once, not trusting herself to speak. The wolf above them took a single step forward, its paws crunching softly in the snow. Cobalt spun toward it, growling, a desperate, uneven sound that cracked in the middle like a man who'd reached the last line of hope. Even in this moment, with his mate unconscious and his cub unmoving, he stood guard. His whole body shook with fatigue, but he wouldn't let that wolf take even 1 inch closer. "Olivia, we're not losing that cub," Ramos said firmly. "Not if it still has a chance." She knew that tone. She had heard it from emergency doctors navigating medical crises, from attorneys promising families they would fight their hardest, and even from elderly neighbors insisting they'd rebuild after a wildfire because their home insurance would sort things out eventually. That tone meant determination. It meant there was still a path forward, even if it was narrow and dark and covered with ice. Olivia lowered herself onto her knees, cupping the cub gently in both hands. The cold seeped through her gloves. She tilted the cub slightly, letting its fragile head rest against her palm. Then she started the motions she'd practiced only in controlled environments, never this high on a mountain ridge, never with her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own breath. "Come on now," she whispered, her voice trembling against the wind. "Don't quit on us." She pressed 2 fingers softly against the cub's tiny chest, feeling for even the hint of a heartbeat. There, something faint, so faint she thought she imagined it. She pressed again, carefully, rhythmically, the way she'd been taught. Short compressions, minimal pressure, each one a plea, each one a prayer. Cobalt crept closer, lowering his massive head until his nose nearly brushed the cub's fur. He let out a "ay-yaw," soft, broken rumble that made Olivia's eyes sting. That sound wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was grief. A sound only a parent, human or animal, could make when faced with losing something precious. "Olivia, keep going," Ramos urged, his voice steady despite the storm brewing around them. "He's reacting to your movements. That means the cub might still be holding on." She shifted the cub slightly and gave the tiniest puff of breath near its muzzle, warming the cold air in front of it. The cub's whiskers trembled, once barely enough to see. She continued the compressions, timing each one to match the faintest rhythm she could feel. Seconds stretched into small eternities. The wolf paced above them, closer now, its eyes fixed on the motionless shape in her hands. "Come on, little one," she murmured. "I know you're tired, but your father's right here. Don't make him wait." Then, right when the ridge seemed ready to swallow the world whole, a sound escaped the cub's throat, so small it could have been mistaken for the wind. A tiny, gasping squeak, fragile and thin, but filled with life. Olivia's breath caught. Noah sucked in air like he'd been drowning. Cobalt jerked upright, his massive head snapping toward the cub as if he'd been struck by lightning. The cub's chest rose, shallowly but undeniably. Then again. A weak tremble ran through its limbs. Its tiny paws curled inward, as if grabbing hold of the world with whatever strength it had left. "There you go," Olivia whispered, tears freezing on her lashes. "That's it, little one. Stay with us." Ramos inspected the cub quickly, then nodded. "It's breathing. Weak, but it's breathing. Keep it warm. Keep it steady." Olivia tucked the cub gently inside her jacket, letting her body heat wrap around it like a blanket. Frost formed along the edge of her coat where the wind struck, but she held the cub close, protecting the tiny spark of life with everything she had. A sudden shift of gravel snapped every head upward. The wolf lunged halfway down the slope, eyeing the lioness again. Cobalt staggered forward, roaring as best he could. His roar was thin, hoarse, broken, but it was enough to stop the wolf in its tracks. Barely. "Noah, flare!" Olivia shouted. Noah yanked another flare from his pack and cracked it open. The spark flared bright red, illuminating the ridge like a warning beacon. The wolf recoiled, lips curling before it slunk back into the fog, frustrated and cautious for now. The brief moment of safety didn't last long. The lioness's body convulsed once, then fell still again. Her breathing had become dangerously shallow, barely more than a whisper. Ramos leaned close to her belly and pressed gently, gauging her response. "We've got more coming," he said. "She's trying, but she's too weak to continue without help." Olivia tightened her arms around the warming cub. The fog curled around her like a shroud, but the small body nestled against her chest moved again, a faint twitch, a tiny breath. Hope had returned, fragile and trembling, but alive. Cobalt lowered his head toward her, his gaze steady. He wasn't looking at the wolf anymore. He wasn't watching the ridge. He was watching her, watching the cub. His breath hitched in small clouds, as if he knew somehow that life had been handed back to them. "Ramos," Olivia said softly, "we saved the first one." The doctor nodded, already preparing the next step. "Good, because we're not done yet." The lioness shuddered. A low groan escaped her throat. The next contraction rolled through her body, weak, painful, but real. The cub in Olivia's coat stirred slightly at the sound, as if answering its mother's call. And for the first time since sunrise, the mountain didn't feel like it was holding its breath anymore. It felt like it was waiting to see if the miracles on that frozen ridge would continue. The ridge had turned into a battlefield between life and the cold, thin air that pressed down on them from every direction. Olivia held the tiny cub tight against her chest, feeling its fragile breaths warm the inside of her jacket. Each movement was faint, delicate, but steady enough to prove it hadn't slipped back into the silence where it had come so close to disappearing. Cobalt stayed inches away from her, watching every shift she made with eyes full of exhaustion and fear. It was as if he understood that this small, shivering life was the only part of his family still clinging to strength. Dr. Ramos worked quickly beside the lioness, his breath forming short clouds as he examined her belly. The first cub had survived, but the mother was slipping, sinking into a state between consciousness and collapse. She barely reacted to the contractions that moved weakly through her abdomen. Noah supported her head with both hands, whispering words meant more to soothe himself than the stunned lioness. The wolf's silhouette still flickered in and out of the fog above, pacing from ledge to ledge as if waiting for nature to make its final call. "We can't deliver the rest up here," Ramos muttered. "Not with the temperature dropping like this. She won't survive another hour on this ridge." Olivia tightened her grip on the cub inside her jacket. "So we move her." Ramos hesitated for just a breath. "Carefully. If she loses oxygen again, we might not get her back." The wind gusted suddenly, kicking up a spray of snow that stung Olivia's cheeks. She looked up the ridge once more. The wolf remained, patient and hungry, ears forward, ready to take anything the cold claimed first. Cobalt snarled at it, but the sound came out thin, shaky. Even he knew he was running out of strength. "We're going now," Olivia commanded. "Noah, get the stretcher." The stretcher unfolded with an echoing snap. They lifted the lioness slowly, working around her limp body as gently as possible. Her head rested against a padded corner. Her legs dangled helplessly. Ramos held her flank with both hands, keeping the warmth pack against her abdomen. Olivia tucked the cub deeper inside her coat, ensuring the tiny miracle stayed shielded from the cold. Cobalt followed every move, staying close without interfering. When the team lifted the stretcher entirely off the ground, he lowered his head and nudged the lioness's paw, one small, trembling gesture that made Olivia's heart pinch. She'd seen families behave that way in hospital waiting rooms, clinging to the smallest signs of hope. It was no different here. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Stay with us. She's still fighting." As they began the descent, The ridge seemed steeper than before. Ice clung to the rocks like shattered glass. One wrong step would send humans and lioness tumbling down the mountain. Noah took the front, Ramos in the back, Olivia walking beside them while supporting the cub. Their breaths synchronized in a tense rhythm, each step deliberate. Halfway down, the wind shifted again. A sharp cracking noise echoed across the slope. Olivia looked up in time to see the wolf bounding down a parallel ledge, snow spraying from its paws. It wasn't charging, not yet, but it was closing distance as if sensing weakness. "Keep moving," Ramos said tightly. "Don't stop." But the path curved along a narrow cliffside just wide enough for 2 boots. Noah edged forward carefully, boots sliding on a patch of ice beneath fresh snow. The stretcher wobbled. The lioness shifted with a soft moan that barely broke the cold air. "Careful," Olivia called. Too late. The snow beneath Noah gave way, and his boot slipped out from under him. His body dropped sideways, and the stretcher lurched dangerously toward the cliff. Ramos dug his heels into the ground and yanked backward, catching the lioness's weight before she rolled off the edge. Cobalt threw himself toward them with a hoarse roar, the sound echoing down the mountainside. Olivia grabbed Noah's arm, pulling him upright with every ounce of strength she had left. "You good?" she gasped. He nodded shakily. Yeah. Far fewer people in their world realized how quickly something as simple as slick snow could turn into a tragedy. Just like homeowners didn't think about property insurance until disaster was staring them down. But up here, one slip could be the end of everything. Olivia steadied her breathing and signaled them forward again. They continued with even more caution, the lioness's body swaying gently with every step. Cobalt walked just close enough to brush his flank against the stretcher from time to time, as if anchoring her with his presence. In Olivia's jacket, the cub stirred again, a faint reminder that the fight wasn't over. At last they reached the flattened ridge line where the rescue vehicles waited, headlights casting weak cones of light through the fog. Noah and Ramos lifted the stretcher into the back of the first truck. Olivia climbed in beside them, still clutching the cub. The small creature's breathing was faint but steady, barely grazing her skin with each breath. The engine rumbled to life. Snow crunched under the tires as the truck began its slow crawl down the narrow road. Olivia looked through the back window and saw Cobalt stepping onto the trail behind them. He didn't run. He didn't roar. He simply followed, placing each paw gently on the path, never leaving more than a few yards between himself and the vehicle carrying the lioness. "He's coming with us," Noah murmured, watching the silhouette through the glass. "Wouldn't you?" Olivia answered softly. As the truck wound down the mountainside, the fog thinned and the evening light grew colder. The cub inside Olivia's jacket gave a sudden, faint twitch. She opened her coat just enough to check on it. Its tiny chest rose, then stopped, then rose again. "Hey," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You stay with me, just like your mama." But the cub didn't respond. Its small body slackened, breathing slowing in a frightening rhythm. Olivia pressed her hand to its side, warming it. "Ramos," she called. "It's happening again." Ramos climbed over the seat, checking the cub with quick hands. "He's fading," he said. "Keep him warm. Don't let his temperature drop." Olivia cradled the tiny life closer, cupping her hands around him like a shield. The truck bumped along the rugged road, each jolt shaking her nerves. She whispered softly, almost unconsciously, stories about the warmth waiting at the rehabilitation center, about how strong he was, about how he just had to hold on a little longer. Her voice was steady, but her heart felt as fragile as the cub she held. Outside, Cobalt continued following the truck, his breath coming in harsh clouds. He never slowed, never hesitated. His mate lay in that truck. His child was struggling inside it. Every instinct in him refused to let either one out of his sight. The sun began to dip behind the mountains, staining the sky with muted gold. Olivia glanced at the cub again, just in time to see its tiny body twitch once more. It wasn't much, but it was life. And for the first time since they'd found the lioness on that frozen ridge, Olivia believed they might actually bring this family out of the mountains alive, if they could just hold on a little longer. Dawn came slowly to the Colorado foothills, spilling pale light across the rehabilitation center like someone lifting a thin blanket. The world was quiet, softened by a layer of morning fog that drifted low over the ground, the same kind of fog that had nearly hidden the lioness's last breaths on that frozen ridge. Olivia stepped outside first, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Her body still felt the exhaustion of the rescue, every muscle carrying the weight of yesterday's fear. But this morning held something different, something gentler, something hopeful. Behind the reinforced medical enclosure, the lioness stirred, her breaths deeper and steadier than they had been in days. She was weak, but the kind of weak that survived a war rather than lost one. The cubs beside her nuzzled against her belly, their small bodies warm under a heating lamp. The strongest two suckled with clumsy insistence, while the smallest, Frost, rested wrapped in a soft cloth against a heated pad. He was still small, still fragile, but every hour he held on made his chances brighter. Olivia reached into the incubator and lifted Frost carefully. The cub blinked slowly, his pale lashes fluttering as if surprised by the light. When she brought him close, he let out a tiny murmur, not loud or demanding like his siblings, but full of a quiet determination that reminded her of the mountain ridge. She held him against her chest, feeling the warmth of his breath. "You're not done fighting, are you?" she whispered. Dr. Ramos entered behind her, wiping his glasses clear. "She's strong enough to stand today," he said, nodding toward the lioness. "Still wobbly, but she'll make it, and the cubs are stable enough for relocation." Olivia felt a rush of relief so deep it almost made her knees buckle. "So today's the day." "Today's the day?" he confirmed. They planned the release at sunrise, when the fog still hugged the tree line, and the world felt quiet enough for new beginnings. Noah brought the transport crate to the door, speaking softly to keep the lioness calm. She rose shakily, her body still tender from the surgery and the long hours of collapse that had nearly taken her. But she stepped into the crate on her own, guided more by instinct and the scent of the open forest than by any human encouragement. Olivia carried Frost out last, tucked inside her jacket the way she had carried him down the mountain. He made a soft sound as the cold air brushed his whiskers, and she tightened her hold just a little. "Almost home," she told him. "You're almost home." The fog thickened as they walked toward the release gate. Pines stood like gray silhouettes, their tops disappearing into the pale sky. The quiet was so complete that even the hum of the center's generators felt distant. Noah opened the main gate, letting the early light pour over the clearing. The lioness stepped out slowly, her paws sinking into the cold grass. Two larger cubs tumbled after her, tripping over their own legs. But the moment Olivia had been waiting for, hoping for, had not yet arrived. She passed Frost gently to Ramos, then stepped toward the open field, scanning the fog beyond the tree line. Her breath clouded in front of her as she whispered, "Come on. You came every day. Show her you're here." The forest answered with silence. Noah glanced at her. Maybe he didn't make it back this morning. But Olivia shook her head. She didn't believe that, not after the way Cobalt had followed the truck for miles, not after the way he'd refused to leave the ridge, not after the way he'd pressed his forehead to his mate's paw before they carried her away. And then, like a shape forming out of a dream, the fog shifted. A dark silhouette stepped forward on Silent Paws. Cobalt. He emerged slowly, one step at a time, his body leaner than it had been, his fur roughened by cold nights waiting outside the boundary fence. But his eyes, those deep amber eyes, shone the moment they found the lioness. He didn't roar or cry out. He simply stood there, breath trembling from his chest, as if he didn't dare believe she was real. The lioness froze. For a heartbeat the world held still. Then she let out a soft, low rumble, weak but unmistakably a call. Cobalt's head dropped, and he crossed the clearing in a slow, reverent walk. When he reached her, he pressed his muzzle to her cheek with a gentleness that didn't belong to the wild. She responded the same way, leaning into him despite her exhaustion. Olivia felt her eyes water. She'd seen many rescues in her career, but rarely reunions like this. It felt like witnessing something sacred. Then Frost stirred in Ramos's hands. A small, thin cry escaped him, and his tiny paws stretched toward the open field. Ramos carried him forward, kneeling a few feet away from the reunited pair. "Easy now, little guy," he whispered, lowering him into the grass. Frost wobbled when his paws touched the earth. He blinked at the fog, the cold, the giant shapes ahead of him. Then he began a slow, unsteady walk toward his family. The lioness turned first, her ears twitching as she recognized his voice. Cobalt followed her gaze, and when he saw Frost stumbling toward them, something shifted in his posture. The big cat crouched, lowering himself until his nose touched the ground. Frost reached him first, lifting a tiny paw and placing it on Cobalt's muzzle in a gesture so small, so impossibly tender, it broke something open in everyone watching. Cobalt closed his eyes, nudging Frost gently, accepting him in a way that needed no words, no sound, no explanation. The lioness stepped closer, her tail brushing Frost's back, gathering him under her warmth. The larger cubs joined a moment later, tumbling around their father's legs. And just like that, the family, broken, torn, nearly lost, was whole again. The fog drifted around, them like a curtain closing softly on a story that had almost ended before it began. Olivia let out a slow breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "We did it," she whispered. "They all made it." Ramos rested a hand on her shoulder. "Miracles don't always come easy," he said, "but the ones worth fighting for rarely do." Cobalt lifted his head one last time, looking at Olivia with an expression she couldn't explain, something like acknowledgement, gratitude carved into the wild. Then he turned, leading his family toward the tree line. Their silhouettes blended with the mist, growing smaller and softer until the fog swallowed them completely. Olivia stayed there long after they disappeared, letting the quiet settle around her. The morning fog never felt so gentle. The cold never felt so forgiving. And the mountains, silent and steady, seemed to hold the promise of a life restored. Sometimes a whole world could be saved on an icy ridge. Sometimes hope came in the shape of a tiny breath. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of dawn, a family walked back into the wilderness, together again.